And now I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar titled, What's New with Citrix? In just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today, Khalaf Haddad. Khalaf has delivered classes on a range of topics with certifications from Novell, Microsoft, CompTIA, Cisco, and Citrix. And in addition to teaching, Khalaf has co-authored 2 vendor courses and has written 1 certification exam. Just a very talented guy, and we're really lucky to have him here today. Khalaf, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Mike, and good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. My name is Khalaf Haddad, and happy to be here with you as we talk about what's new with Citrix. And if you've been watching the headlines over the last 18 months, Citrix has been all over the board on that, and in some good ways and some interesting ways. And so we'll talk a little bit about those. Speaking of, let's go ahead and talk about the interesting ways in which Citrix has been in the news. As many of you are familiar with, Citrix is a world leader in providing what we call secure digital workspaces for any user at any time from any device, anywhere they happen to be. And with this any mantra that Citrix has had over the years, it served well when the pandemic hit and pushed everybody to work from home. Citrix was uniquely positioned to be able to provide solutions that scaled very quickly to meet that surge in demand. And many of us in the Citrix world were like, okay, pandemic is a bad thing, but as far as this rapid adoption of Citrix technologies, it's an exciting thing. And after that initial surge, it seems like there's been a slight leveling of where Citrix is at on that. So after that initial spike, things have kind of leveled off, and we haven't seen too much. Now, granted, behind the scenes, Citrix has some incredibly talented engineers and architects designing some great features and enhancements and improvements, which keeps Citrix right at the forefront of leading performance and metrics. And so when we look at competitive products from other vendors, quite frankly, Citrix is rather uniquely positioned where they are in terms of providing those virtual app and desktop solutions integrated with an application delivery controller, endpoint management, cloud storage, and the like. But it's this word cloud that has been a source of tension, perhaps, with Citrix, in that while Citrix years ago identified a move toward cloud, in fact, the domain name cloud.com is owned by Citrix. Fun fact. That's right. If you look up who owns cloud.com, that's a Citrix domain name. So Citrix figured that one out quickly, got onto that cloud.com, and has continually grown their offering. So some of you may be familiar with the concept of software as a service, and Citrix is driving toward that in terms of taking their flagship virtual apps and desktops product and offering that as a service, and that's what we refer to as the CVAD, or Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops Service. So in Citrix product discussions, anything tagged with the word service at the end is the cloud version of the on-prem product, and that's been a fascinating thing. So all is rather interesting in the world of Citrix as time marched on. So pandemic shot up demand. I think about a year and a half ago, I was hearing reports like license sales for Citrix cloud products were up by 400% or something absurd. I mean, there were just some really huge numbers thrown out there, and everybody was. But at some point, that petered out, and the momentum was lost. And so, so a little bit of shuffling took place. And back in October of this year, David Henschel stepped down as CEO. Nice gentleman, but having missed a few sales targets when you're the CEO, that typically calls for resignation. So once again, for the second time, Bob Calderoni stepped up as the interim CEO. Now, Bob is familiar, I should say Mr. Calderoni, I don't know him that well to call him Bob, but Mr. Calderoni is familiar enough with Citrix. He's been around there for almost 2 decades in various capacities. He's sitting on the board there, now he's the CEO. So he provided leadership previously when Mark Templeton stepped down as CEO several years ago. So this is Mr. Calderone's second stint. The focus there that Bob brings is a goal to drive toward the cloud more aggressively. One of the challenges that Citrix has faced, according to some analysts, is that in their attempt to move to the cloud, they tried to do the best of both worlds. It's a little noisy there, and as a result, instead of biting the bullet and making a major push, just try to do it gradually. So instead of taking the initial hit on revenue to get more people moved to the cloud more aggressively, Citrix has done it gradually, and it's going to draw that out, and analysts were too happy from it with that. So that's going to be stepped up. But even with this change in leadership, we're going to acknowledge four things. First of all, that flagship product, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, isn't going anywhere except to the cloud. In other words, Citrix will continue to provide that on-premises solution for companies that are still reluctant to go to the cloud. Now, second thought there, Citrix Cloud growth will be accelerated. And from what I've seen over the last couple of years working with the Citrix Cloud product, it has just continued to grow. In fact, not just grow in popularity, but in terms of feature set. Citrix does pour a lot of R&D into the cloud offering, and any new features that Citrix is going to introduce into Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops will show up in the cloud first, then the current release, and will be rolled into the upcoming LTSR or long-term service release. Thought number three, Citrix Application Delivery Controller, the product formerly known as NetScaler. And thank you, Prince, for popularizing that phraseology. The Citrix ADC will continue to add new features. And with its latest release here about 2-3 months ago, version 13.1, talk a little bit about that in a bit. Citrix is going to continue that development and growth plan as it does factor in very well into Citrix's overarching strategy of offering a secure digital workspace. Item number 4, though, is that all other products are subject to review. And this happens anytime there's a change in CEO that's brought on perhaps by a sliding revenue, maybe activist investors. There's a number of factors going on, but all other products are subject to review. Like last year when Citrix in a very splashy acquisition acquired Rike, W-R-I-K-E, and I looked at that as adding that to the project portfolio, saying, hey, we're gonna go into this productivity space, and we're going to add Rike to what we already have with Podio. And well, remember what happened with the GoTo products? Like we're using GoTo Webinar today. At one point, it was by Citrix, and now it is no longer. It's been spun off. And so some people are expecting a similar spin-off of some of the products that Citrix has acquired over the years. So we're doing a little bit of a wait and see here over the next few months to see from a portfolio perspective where Citrix is going to end up. But what we are pretty comfortable with is that Citrix's flagship product, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, that is something that Citrix will always be known for. There's always rumors about Citrix being sold or purchased by another company and integrated. I think those rumors have been going on for, quite frankly, decades. So there's, I can't say there's nothing to it, because at some point that rumor could prove to be true, and it'll just be a very interesting and curious day when that happens. So I don't need to hold my breath for that. What we want to do is make sure that we are comfortable knowing what the product roadmap is, particularly for those of us that are going to be involved in ongoing support of the existing Citrix solutions that we have deployed in our worlds, namely the CVAD and the ADC. Like I said, other products, even the Citrix SD-WAN, that one's up for conversation. And for all the development that Citrix has put into that product and how that one's matured, it's interesting to see that SD-WAN may be on the chopping block. I have no inside knowledge. I'm just speculating at this point. So please do not make any investment choices based on what I might hear. Please, if you with an eye toward investment, I encourage you to, again, do your own research. So let me perhaps step away from the business end of things and get to something I think a little bit more comfortable, which is the technical part of what's going on here. So with Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, or CVAD, talking about the flagship product that has been implemented on premises since the 90s. It has matured into this wonderful thing, but I'll tell you, over the last 5 or 6 years, what we've seen from Citrix is mostly refinements to performance, reliability, and security. Now, granted, those are not bad things at all. Citrix is fully committed to making Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops the best product in class. And many would agree with me in saying that they have. And I must confess, there is a little bit of bias on my part, as well as the folks at Citrix. But when Gartner Group consistently pushes it into that upper right quadrant, you know that they're doing something right. So in light of that continued development, the next current release, which is the current release cycle that Citrix is committed to, is on a quarterly basis. They will release a new code base with a collection of features that they have developed over the past 3 months. Now, those features from over the past 3 months will have already been tried out in the cloud. So if you have the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops service, you will have already run into some of these features if you're keeping up with them there and choosing to implement them. Now, the challenge with the current release, as those of you that have gone with that licensing model know, is that you have to keep current. So Citrix does allow for you to maybe skip a current release, so that instead of updating every 3 months, you update your infrastructure every 6 months. But beyond that, Citrix will not be too happy to help support the things that are older than 2 current releases. And that's just a staffing burden plus an encouragement for you to continue moving forward with the features that they implement. Some organizations prefer a more stable approach with a stable code base with no additional features except for every maybe 2 years. And so the last long-term service release, or LTSR, was in December of 2019, so about 2 years ago. So we're due for another one. I guess Citrix did commit to about a 2-year cycle for LTSRs. And so we're expecting one Q1 of next year. Now, as far as over the last few months, some of the new features that Citrix has introduced, they've given some pretty cool things. So for just to put it out there, first of all, an announcement was made that support for Windows 2012 R2 has been deprecated. Now I bring this up somewhat humorously because I do run across a lot of documentation that suggests that Windows 2012 Windows Server 2012 R2 is a minimum OS version for a lot of the products. Now, if you're still deploying Windows 2012 R2, okay, that's fair. I can understand why some organizations would choose to continue to deploy that, even though Server 2016, 2019 have been around for a while. For some organizations, the validation process is so lengthy that try to extend the life of an operating system as far as possible before going through another validation process. Totally understandable. But at this point, Citrix is no longer going to be supporting, and actually hasn't since last year, Windows 2012 R2. So Windows 2012 R2 support has been deprecated, it's gone. What we have now, though, is Windows is supporting and already is supporting and testing on Windows 11 and Windows Server 2022, which is like, okay, that's coming out next year. Yes, but of course, Citrix and Microsoft are really, really good buddies. So as far as getting access to betas and pre-releases, Citrix has that kind of relationship with Microsoft where they can test things ahead of time and be really ahead on the curve because, yeah, like I said, Citrix and Microsoft are buddies. I think there's a term coined years ago called co-opetition, and Citrix and Microsoft do that very well. They cooperate on a good many things, even though they compete in certain areas. So with that, that's a good thing to know. Another thing that would be of interest to those of you that operate in the federal space is the Federal Information Processing Standards, which is, as you know, a set of compliance requirements for any systems that are implemented. In order for a product to achieve FIPS certification, certain checklists have to be reviewed and certain thresholds have to be met. And Citrix has finally done that with their workspace environment management component. That's the Northscale acquisition that does some tremendous things in terms of getting settings out of group policy, as well as improving some of the, like I said, the workspace environment management, some of the resource management components, in addition to the policy management pieces, in addition to profile management, user virtualization. There's a lot of things. If you haven't explored WEM yet, that's a really good tool to consider implementing in your environment. But now there is a white paper out where the appropriate configuration for WEM will ensure FIPS compliance. Everything from securing and encrypting the WEM database on the SQL server to securing the WEM traffic in motion and all the other requirements that are stipulated by FIPS. So again, really good thing. Another feature that Citrix has implemented there is adaptive audio. And adaptive audio is something that they've given us a while back. And the idea of adaptive audio is that it's an improved audio quality within session, a brand new audio codec and auto configuration logic, so that it will allow for real-time quality sampling and adjusting it based on what the condition of the network is. So instead of blasting out the highest sampling rate for all the audio and thereby clogging up the network, the HDX adaptive audio will detect whether there is congestion on the network and then maybe back off the sampling rate. So the idea being, we want to sacrifice clarity for smoothness. I think it's okay if my voice is tinny, but if it's choppy, it's difficult to follow. And since audio is a real-time application, that's what we want to smooth for. And so Citrix, again, with that leading vision for this type of communication, extends the capability of the high definition user experience, or HDX, with this adaptive audio feature. Along with that is the enlightened data transport that Citrix has developed for carrying this. So enlightened data transport is a TCP kind of equivalent. So it deals with the transport layer. It's a layer 4 protocol that Citrix has developed. And what again, it's going to be adaptable and adjusting based on the conditions of the network. And so one of the features that they introduced was this idea of the MT, or maximum transport unit, discovery process, understanding that based on certain network conditions and certain detected congestion, how can we adjust the maximum transport unit so that we don't lose data in transport. And this is a particular interest with mobile devices. And so the MTU discovery, or the ability to negotiate the maximum transport unit, has been brought into the mobile platform. So for Mac and Android clients, that allows us to improve the experience over long haul connections for mobile devices. And that's really cool. Citrix has also continued to develop in the Linux world, and that's, to me, an interesting thing. They say they're acknowledging the changing landscape of desktops. Now, Microsoft has made a very strong case and a strong presence in corporate America. I don't think we can imagine life without Microsoft products and technologies, but more and more, the Linux has made strides in being available, to the point where Citrix did release a virtual delivery agent, or a VDA, for Linux machines. So Linux machines can host application and desktop resources that Citrix then provides to users. So as part of this ongoing engagement with Linux, Citrix now includes the ability to use smart cards for authentication as an enhanced security method for Linux users. So that's pretty cool that smart card auth is now available. I was not expecting that, but pretty nifty nonetheless. All right. But as I mentioned earlier, the new features that Citrix provides will almost always show up in the cloud first. So if we want to get a sense of what's coming up in the next current release, all we have to do is look back the last few months and see what Citrix has introduced in their cloud version of the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops product. And the cloud version is known as the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops service. So it's a rather easy nomenclature. Anytime we see the word service added to the end of a Citrix offering, it refers to something that is available via a Citrix Cloud subscription. And so Citrix has introduced some pretty cool things. For example, the ability to update persistent MCS catalogs. So real quick, with machine creation services, or MCS, we have the ability to create a desktop or a machine catalog based off of desktop OS machines. When we create those, we have the option to either randomly assign them to individual users or statically assign them as a persistent offering. And the challenge is, and we know that when we assign them statically and persistently, that we lose the ability to update the machine catalog, or I should say we lose the ability to update all machines in the machine catalog. Well, what we also know is that over time, those static persistent machines have to be managed by something like System Center Configuration Manager or the like. But the challenge has been, it's like, all right, so if we have this static persistent machine catalog and we want to add machines to the catalog, we're going to be adding it based off of an old image. Well, once that machine is created, we will then have to update it immediately all the way through using System Center. And so what Citrix has done now is they've given us the ability to say, all right, fair enough, go ahead and update the machine catalog. And what we'll do is going forward, new machines will be built off of the updated master image. And so that's a pretty neat step, and it can save quite a bit of effort depending on how many of these static machines you deploy. Some other things is working with workspace environment management. Again, Citrix will continue to develop and provide wonderful offerings there with workspace environment management. And sure enough, with Citrix Cloud, there is a WEM service, or a workspace environment management service. So this is available through Citrix Cloud. We can assign a machine catalog to a WEM configuration set. So in WEM, a configuration set is exactly what it sounds like. It's a set of a collection of settings that are going to be applied to the machines that are assigned to it. And so we can now do that at the machine catalog level. Nice thing about that is that we can do that either before or after the machines are deployed. So nevertheless, a nice thing. Granted, the master image would have to include the WEM agent. That is to be expected. But you know, also the ability to document updates to images. So there's a little documentation field. I thought that was kind of a cool thing. And Citrix is also continuing to expand our ability to flexibly schedule restarts. So scheduled restarts are just part of the nature of the beast, and we know that will happen from time to time. So we've known about daily and weekly restarts. There's now a monthly option in the Citrix Cloud service. So pretty cool things. And again, this is just a small sampling of those, and want to just give you a little bit of an insight. But as Citrix continues to innovate and develop and refine, the new features will show up in the cloud service first, then the current release, and then ultimately every couple of years, everything will get rolled up into a long-term service release. All right. Continuing on then, let's take a look at the what I would consider my personal favorite technology, which is the Citrix ADC. In 30 years of teaching classes for New Horizons, I enjoy teaching the Citrix ADC classes. In fact, I'm looking forward to next week. We've got the Citrix Gateway class coming up, and it's just going to be 5 days of pure bliss. It's just so much fun to play with a product that I enjoy thoroughly because of all the cool things that it can do and how many problems it solves and how much time it saves. So really excited about that. I want to point out that even though we say that ADC version 13.1 was released back in September, we think about, okay, well, we had 13.0 for a while, but 13.1 doesn't sound like a big deal, but that's considered a major release, interestingly enough. So it's not one that we would implement lightly. So just say, oh, they've updated to 13.1. No, there's a little bit more to it. So it would require some validation testing, some time in your lab before you go to implement it. But the things that you can look forward to is that while if you've been working with 13.0 for a while, you know, anytime you've written a classic policy expression or used a feature that relied on classic expressions, there would be a message that came up saying this feature is being deprecated, or classic expressions are being deprecated. And you've seen those warnings in the GUI in 13.0 anytime we've touched on classic expression. Well, the promise has been that when 13.1 was released, the classic policy engine would be gone altogether. And while I can't say that it's completely gone, we know that they have removed many of the features that relied on classic policies. So for example, content filtering. The content filtering, or the filter feature, has been removed finally. Now in its place, we know that we can use the responder feature, excuse me, and that's all well and good. Some of the other protection features like speedy, sure connect, priority queuing, HTTP denial of service, and HTML injection features, all of those are gone in favor of the app QoE. So if we still need to implement those types of protection features, those are still available through app QoE. Classic policies are also gone from SSL, from content switching, cache redirection, compression, app firewall, load balancing, persistence rules. So they're all gone from there. So then the question becomes, where are we still using classic policies? And at this point in time, I haven't been able to confirm this yet, but it still looks like we are using classic policies in and around the gateway. And I think that was the big hope we were looking forward to in 13.1, is that classic policies would be gone from the gateway. Now that may still happen at an upcoming at a firmware release in the near future, but for now I cannot confirm that that has happened with the gateway feature. All right, many other expressions, or I should say many other features, have been deprecated around classic expressions, and all well and good. But another area in which Citrix has done quite a bit of work here is in the area of bot management. Now, this is something that Citrix introduced a couple of years ago, and the idea of bot management is in response to a lot of the automated processes that run across the internet today. Now, there are some good bots and there are some bad bots. There are some good bots that we would write to facilitate some of the mundane daily tasks that we have to perform, and then there are the not so good tasks of scrapers and other bots out there looking to do harm by footprinting and doing some pre-attack launches and sizing up our networks. So Citrix has in the ADC a bot management tool that observes the incoming requests and sees whether they match a certain signature. So it's a signature-based, behavior-based. And so when the incoming traffic detected as a bot, the way the Citrix system works is that it'll detect the type of bot, and then depending on the policies that you create around that, will assign an action either to allow the traffic to come through or just drop it. And then over time, as we gather information about the types of bots that hit our site, we can generate some insights and some reports that help us to better protect against these types of automated assaults that our networks are subject to on a daily basis. So when answering the question, what's new with Citrix? Well, the answer is not much in terms of Citrix continues to be the industry leader in the virtual apps and desktop space. They have a leading product there in the Citrix ADC in terms of offering security, stability, and performance, unlike any other appliance in that category. And so as far as being able to provide a whole solution or a unified solution to provide secure digital workspaces to remote work, especially to a remote workforce, Citrix is still doing it and still doing it well. They continue to develop and refine their offerings, and they still lead the pack wherever they go. And one final thought there is that with the shift in leadership, we can expect to see the Citrix cloud offerings continue to grow. as Citrix is going to accelerate its transition to a SaaS model. How that may impact you, well, that depends on how your organization feels about participating in the cloud. Over the years, I've talked to a number of people, some of whom are very engaged with cloud solutions, and some who are the exact opposite. Their organizations have decided to have nothing to do with cloud services by any stretch of the imagination, and then everything in between. But the cloud is here, and it is not going anywhere anytime soon, and it is a good thing. So in short, Citrix continues to innovate. They will look to refine their product offerings and perhaps become a stronger, more focused company here in the next few months. And so at this point, I'm going to open up the floor to any questions, comments, or thoughts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Khalaf. And if anyone has any questions, please do take a moment to type them into the questions box, and we'll get to them shortly. And if anyone is interested in the material presented in this webinar, or if you have questions regarding available course offerings, please contact your local New Horizons Center for further information. You can log on to newhorizons.com and do a zip code or region search for the center nearest you. Our webinar schedule is also up to date on our website, www.newhorizons.com. Just click on the webinars link about halfway down the page to view the full schedule and register for any upcoming sessions. And a friendly reminder, we will be sending out the recording link to today's webinar later today. So I do have some questions here, Khalaf.
Yes.
How does Citrix compare to competitors like VMware?
Well, that's a great question. In fairness, VMware is another one of those co-opetition relationships, as a majority of people that implement Citrix on premises are using VMware as a hypervisor. But VMware does have the Horizon product line and other offerings in the virtual apps and desktop space. I don't have specific experience with the VMware products as they compare, so my information is anecdotal at best. And the simplicity and the efficiency of the Citrix products is still considerably ahead of VMware. And again, that's a slightly biased, slightly uninformed opinion based on the dozens of conversations I've had over the last couple of years. That being said, I don't think VMware is a company that sits by idly. They will continue to update and refine and try to bring people into their ecosystem. But there's over 400,000 organizations that have adopted Citrix products and technologies, so I don't think there's going to be any shortage of Citrix customers in the near future, nor do I think that there's going to be a huge mass migration away from Citrix, as long as Citrix continues to innovate and stay ahead, refine their cloud offering, and continue to be the best of breed. It's hard to get to the top. It's harder to stay up there. And I have to give Citrix some credit for some of the missteps that they've had over the years. The fact that they've been able to stay at the top of that from a technology perspective for so long is quite impressive.
Great. And what's recent Citrix acquisitions like Right Signature do you find most interesting, and why?
Speaking purely as an individual, I find every acquisition, I find that Reich acquisition interesting from the perspective of why. I don't get it. It doesn't seem to align with Citrix's core strengths. So I would not be surprised if that one goes the way of the GoToMeeting products and finds a new home. The two more recent acquisitions that I think were interesting and beneficial was the workspace environment management that I mentioned in the webinar, and that was a company called Northscale. The Northscale acquisition, I think, gave Citrix a really good product to improve their experience. Now, the interesting thing about the workspace environment management product is that while Citrix has purchased it and integrated it, it is a solution that could be deployed outside of a Citrix implementation. So if I was a non-Citrix shop, I could technically implement WEM. Problem is that WEM licensing is tied to Citrix licensing, and so I don't know if they'll do something where they would be willing to license WEM separately and let other organizations benefit from that without implementing Citrix products. The other recent acquisition, going back a few years, and it was around the same time they acquired Northscale. They acquired the app layering product from Unidesk. And app layering, I think I'm officially on the fence on that one. And that's because app layering is a great concept in terms of reducing the number of gold images that have to be maintained. But the effort in so doing is significant enough that unless you had like 8 or 10 or 12 gold images that you're trying to keep maintained all at once, you don't begin to realize the full benefits of it. Now, organizations that have had 20 or more gold images that they were maintaining separately for their Citrix implementations, they love it, and they should, because it does reduce the amount of workload on maintaining your gold images. But for a lot of organizations that have already simplified their image management down to 2 or 3, the app layering solution that they acquired from Unidesk isn't really going to give them any strong efficiencies on that.
All right, next one is, you talked about VMware and other co-opetition people that are out there. Who do you think Citrix needs to look out for, if any organization?
It's an interesting mix there, because the Citrix product portfolio is structured the way it is. I don't think they have one direct competitor. So, for example, in the virtual apps and desktop space, VMware. Okay, keep an eye on them. In the application delivery controller space, that would be, I think their biggest competitor is F5, or F5 big IP thing. But yeah, so those would be the two that jump to mind. I think, though, looking over the past 8-9 years that I've been involved with Citrix Technologies, and getting to know some of the people that work for Citrix, I'd have to say that Citrix's biggest concern is themselves, and deciding who they're going to be in the next 5 years. And if they can figure out what they want to be and then do it and do it well, then they'll be all right. And I say that particularly in light of that Reich acquisition. I'm still scratching my head trying to figure that one out. I can't. So, and neither can a lot of other people. So
Fair enough.
Yeah, getting out of their own way sometimes would be a good thing.
So if I want to get started with Citrix, what should I do? Where do I begin?
That's a fantastic question. To get started with Citrix would be a matter of just getting into and seeing what these products do. And the best way I can think of doing that would be, well, join me a week from Monday. I'll be teaching the CWS 215 class, which is the first class in preparing to become a Citrix administrator. In that 5 days, we go from everything from taking just a plain environment and installing Citrix right out of the box, the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops product. We install it right out of the box. We build the images, we share the resources, publish them, and we show what virtual apps do, what virtual desktops do, and how easy it is to manage, to secure. And then on the 5th day of that class, we even take some time to look at the Citrix Cloud offering. So it's like a twofer in 5 days. You get to look at the on-premises product, and then you can see how that translates to the cloud. And it's in that moment on day 5 that we as a group see the genius of the architecture, that the transition to cloud is almost seamless. And I get real excited about that.
Wonderful. And you talked about the major releases and the current releases. How major are the current releases? Are they big? Are they just a few things? What are they like?
The current releases are Citrix's commitment to include new features every 3 months. So this is precipitated by the fact that new features can be introduced on a bi-weekly basis in Citrix Cloud. So Citrix commits to updating the cloud every 2 weeks with any new features and any bug fixes. So then Citrix rolls that up to a current release every 3 months for on-premises users. So there are some quarters that go by where not a whole lot happened, and there are some quarters that go by where a lot of things happened. And the challenge, though, is that for companies that put themselves on the current release schedule, they do have to keep up. So that means that every 3 months, the staff is spending a weekend updating everything. You know, hopefully they can get a lot of it done during the day, but sometimes you got to do things on the weekend, as we know as IT people. But yeah, because one thing that the current release schedule does require is that you do update. You don't skip more than one current release. If you skip two, then you're out of support.
That's an important point. Is there one particular cool or easily missed feature in ADC that you particularly like? You mentioned that you really like ADC.
Interestingly enough, I have to say that there is a feature that I discovered this week getting ready for this webinar that's been around since version 11 that I didn't know about. And I read about it. I was like, wow, I can't wait to try that. So I think I'm going to block some time next week to explore it. And it's the age-old problem of doing HTTP to HTTPS redirection. Traditionally, what we've done is many of you have experienced, if you were to simply type in the URL and go to port 80, which is HTTP, like for email, for example. Email is a great one. Like Exchange does this all the time. You supply the port 80 URL and it kicks you over to 443. So then all of a sudden your browser says HTTPS. You see the certificate and all that other fun stuff that goes with it. So we get this HTTP to HTTPS redirection. Now on an ADC, there are a couple of different approaches to it. One is we could set up a load balancer that's always down that uses the redirect URL. Another is to set a load balancer that's always up with a responder policy that redirects. In both cases, we're creating a second load balancing entity. Come to find out that since version 11, we could create a port 443 or an SSL load balancer and just add a parameter at the command line that says, oh yeah, by the way, do the port 80 redirect for me as well. I'm like, wow, that would save a few minutes of clicks right there. So I'm looking forward to trying that one out next week when I get some lab time.
Excellent, excellent. I just have one last question here. Again, folks, if you have additional questions, please feel free to type them in the questions box. You mentioned the relationship between Citrix and Microsoft. Are there logical combinations of programs for me to become familiar with to do better at my job?
Logical combinations of programs to be able to better do. I suppose the heart of that question is, what is the job? The cooperation between Citrix and Microsoft revolves largely around how Citrix does things and how Microsoft writes its licensing agreements. So I suppose if you want to get better at something to do your job, it would be maybe take a course in reading legal contracts or licensing agreements, because when you implement Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops, every Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops implementation requires up to 3 additional Microsoft licenses: a client access license, a remote desktop services license, and a third one. And looking at that, like, wow. So even before I crack the seal on the Citrix box, I've already sent a lot of additional money over to Microsoft. Like, wow. So, but as far as the technology goes, you know, being comfortable with Windows Server, with Active Directory, with group policy, those are all things that we use extensively in the Citrix world. I'd say Active Directory and group policy especially. DNS is fairly straightforward, so I don't sweat that one, but Active Directory and group policy, understanding those well, go a long way in helping you in a Citrix career.
Thank you. Well, that's all the questions we have. Thank you. I really appreciate your time. Really appreciate you taking time for the questions and going over what's new with Citrix. Even though you said there's a limited amount, it's still nice to see what's there. We really appreciate it. So thank you again for joining us, Khalaf. We really, really appreciate your time.
Well, my pleasure. And thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. That concludes today's session.